Mode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ernie Humphrey, the CEO of Treasury Webinars. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us for our webinar today. Cash forecasting, challenges, modeling, and visualization. I would like to thank our webinar partner today, Financial Sciences, a leading provider of integrated enterprise financial systems for multinational corporations and financial institutions whose visual treasury and risk management solution, Atom, is helping companies of all sizes unlock the strategic value of treasury. Cloud computing and big data finally make cash forecasting easy, right? Not by a long shot. It still remains a process filled with challenges, inefficiency, mysteries, and inaccurate information that can lead to less than optimal working capital optimization. Today, you'll discover how companies are leveraging technology to improve the cash forecasting process, resulting in better decision making within and beyond Treasury. We discuss the theory behind successful cash forecasting in today's world and address the following topics: how to assess the cash forecasting process at your company and determine the various sources of forecast information. We'll discuss real-world forecast modeling challenges. We'll discuss opportunities for automating forecasting automation and examples of how to manage forecasts visually through effective dashboards and leading-edge Treasury technology. Before we delve into the content, I'm going to offer a few quick words about Treasury webinars, cover a few housekeeping items, and then review our learning objectives as they offer our value proposition to you for investing an hour of your valuable time with us today. Treasury Webinars offers webinars designed to empower Treasury, accounts payable, and accounts receivable success at companies of all sizes across all industries. We only do what we do best, webinars. Now for the exciting housekeeping items. Those of you interested in CTP credit for today's webinar, you'll have to answer all of our polling questions today and remain on for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions regarding CTP credit, please send an email to ernie@treasurywebinars.com. Again, that's ernie@treasurywebinars.com. We would love to hear from you today, so I encourage you to ask questions at any time in the questions area of your go-to webinar panel today. We have 3 speakers, other than myself, who have great experience and knowledge in the arena of treasury and cash forecasting, so I encourage you to take the opportunity to tap into their knowledge. Fear not, if we do not get to your question during the Q&A session, we will have one of our speakers follow up with you directly. Finally, we appreciate your consideration in taking a short survey at the end of the webinar today, as we always strive to improve the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. Our learning objectives. We'd like you to be able to separate cash forecasting myths from reality and define what a successful cash forecast looks like at your company. Like you to be able to identify opportunities to automate cash forecasting to improve the quality of short and long-term cash forecasts at your companies. And finally, understand the value proposition for managing forecasts visually through effective dashboards and leading-edge treasury technology. How are we going to accomplish our objectives today? I'm going to cover the first part of our presentation today, some cash forecasting myths and reality, challenges and inherent barriers to cash forecasting success, how to identify the resources that you need, and then we will have a seasoned practitioner help us. So I will talk about the theory and we'll talk about the practice of cash forecasting and some lessons learned from a Treasury thought leader. And then we'll talk about cash forecasting, the new frontier in terms of the technology, the new visual approach. And we will have 2 speakers from our webinar partner, and they are going to walk us through a visual approach to cash forecasting and how automation can benefit cash forecasting, which I think is fascinating. So I think we've seen a lot of new technology in theory out there, but in practice, I think this is something that is really unique that I've been seeing. And myself, I'm more of a visual person. So when I'm starting to see some of the tools that are available to help me visually understand how to look at the variances and what's coming and understand what's causing those variances and what's going to happen and how to look forward, it's pretty fascinating to me. And then we'll wrap things up with some final thoughts. So why cash forecasting matters, in case there are folks that may be CFOs out there needing this little bit of a reminder, they're not these treasury leaders like myself in my past life. So I think this is really helps define the value proposition of why cash forecasting is important. And sometimes we need to remind not only our CFOs, but ourselves. it really impacts borrowing and investment decisions. So if we have inaccurate information, it can cause us to borrow money when we don't need to borrow money. It can impact our short-term investments, what we invest in. We may accidentally invest and then not have cash on hand. We might need to borrow when we don't need to. It can also impact our decisions regards to managing FX currency risk, so we can enter into transactions when we don't need to. So we don't want to be entering into FX transactions and getting into contracts when we don't need to. It impacts our covenant compliance risk, so we want to make sure that we understand if we're bumping up against those covenants. We want to see how those covenants might be impacted by the cash forecast, especially if we're looking at acquisition. Of course, the better cash forecast improves our working capital efficiency. And what we're seeing across the board is we're seeing companies leverage technology to take more ownership of the cash conversion cycle. So we're seeing obviously Treasury technology, but we're also seeing accounts payable automation, accounts receivable automation. So we're really starting to see companies really own that entire cash conversion cycle. And that's really a function of the visibility that we're getting in these automation tools, allowing us to see what's going on and then start to understand why it's happening. So also it impacts our financial agility. So the better cash forecast we have, the better we're able to optimize our working capital, optimize our capital structure. It impacts our operational agility. So it can allow us to capitalize on opportunities that we have, new markets, new relationships with our customers, M&A opportunities. And if you're a publicly traded company, there's an increased investor focus on cash balances and cash deployment efficiency. So that's becoming important that we show that we have a handle on our cash balances and that we are deploying cash as effectively as possible. So some of the forecasting myths, they might be old to some of you that have been in Treasury and Finance a while, but they still exist, because when I go to AFP conferences, Treasury Management conferences, I still have some of these come up in my conversations. So one myth is the benchmark for success is how close you get to 100% accuracy. Well, almost without doubt, that is not even possible. So what I say is that you need to get to the level of accuracy that impacts your decisions. So if there's some element where you need to get to, 70, 80, 85, 90% accuracy, that is what your benchmarks is. Sometimes there is an inherent barrier to success in your company. We'll talk about this, whether it's people, process, and technology that inhibits you from getting to your desired level or 100% accuracy. So you need to set that target level. And then as you go from where you're at to where you need to be, you need to do that ROI analysis. So if I invest in XYZ, it's going to get me to this level of accuracy. What's the impact going to be? But what we're seeing nowadays, which is great, is if we're going to invest in technology, we have to look at the value in the technology beyond Treasury and across finance. And so what we're starting to see a lot, which is great, is that CFOs are taking a strategic look at all of the business systems and seeing, okay, what is the right cost-effective technology? So if I upgrade my cash forecasting technology with some TMS or a module focused on cash forecasting, what does that do? How can that be part of an overall project that we're doing? And then a couple other myths, the more data in terms of cash forecasting, the better. And so we need to have a data diet. It's certainly the case that we don't want to ignore data, but we want to focus on the information that is driving our variance. And so what we want to do is we really want to focus on that data diet and how to optimize that data. Now, those drivers may change, so that information can absolutely be extremely valuable to you in validating that these are the right drivers or identifying right drivers. But we want to make sure that we have a reason. So just say you're doing a regression analysis, if you're getting a little sophisticated, the more information you put in, the higher the R-squared is going to be, but that doesn't mean it's going to be better. And then that goes with my next myth, the more complicated, the better the cash forecast. That's absolutely not true. My personal experience, I was a treasury manager at a manufacturer of submersible motors. I came out of grad school and I thought I was really smart. So I said, hey, I want to do some cash forecasting. So one of the product managers said to me, okay, I'm going to give you the information and I'm going to let you do your forecast and I'm going to do my forecast, right? So really the product manager's forecast was just based on historical norms, trends, looked at the means, looked at the weather, because that really drove demand for us. And so I have to admit, I wasn't even close, right, to what he was doing. So it wasn't the sophistication in what he was doing, it was the knowledge that he had that he was putting in there. So it really didn't need to be complicated to get us where we needed to be. So that's important to keep in mind. And then technology. Technology is magic in some sense. I guess it's not magic. It's a key to an effective forecast. I should say technology can be magical, but it all depends on what you're trying to do. So we'll talk about how automating that technology and using it to have that more visual approach can definitely make an impact. But I would not get in love with the more complicated, the more technology is going to mean the better forecast. So that kind of leads to me into setting the stage. So there are just some pillars of success. You need to understand the type of forecast and the goals of your forecast. This seems like common sense, but sometimes when you're assessing where you're at, or if you're just starting, this really kind of shocks you. Oh, okay, let's take a look at that. So you can have the operational forecast, which is more short term, 1 to 30 days, and then we can have a medium term, 12-month, and then we can have a long term strategic forecast. And the methods that we use in these forecasts can be different. We want to look at each type of forecast that we're doing. And then you want to define the goals of your forecast, right? You manage short-term borrowings. That's probably an operational forecast. If you're going to tie to balance sheet forecasting, that might be more of a longer term. And then you're managing your capital structure. That could be a medium or long term. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you want to have that desired level of forecast accuracy. So you don't want to just go in and say, we need to be 100% accurate, right? Where are we now? What's our accuracy? What's driving it? What can we do to improve the accuracy? What is it? People, process, technology. What does it take for us to get to where we need to be? And then we make that decision on how to get there. So setting the stage, again, some of this seems like common sense. You need to understand your inflows and outflows. My advice is to map your cash flows across your entire organization. Identify your inflow sources, outflow sources. Identify within your company who drives the cash flows, who pushes the button, who controls the movements of cash, and identify all systems used to move and record fund movements. So what you'll be able to do there is you'll be able to understand how to manage your data, right? What is the data that I need? Where am I going to get it? What's the system that I have to get it? If I'm going to buy a system such as a treasury management system, do we have systems integrability to get that data? So you want to understand all the elements, people, process, and technology, and that helps you define the parameters of your forecast and understand the people that you need to engage and the inherent barriers that you might face. So let's go ahead and launch our first polling question. Just trying to benchmark you, the audience, and see where you're at. How would you describe the visibility of cash balances and movements at your company? In my mind, that visibility is really the pillar of success, and you can't manage what you can't see, right? So this should be an absolute goal of yours to get real-time visibility of those cash balances and those movements at your company when they happen. So predicting those right on the front side, AP and AR, and then once the money leaves the door, and on the banking side and when it comes in. So we want to have that visibility. Just want to remind those of you who are interested in CTP credit, you'll have to answer all of our polling questions. Thank you so much to everyone for taking the time to answer the questions. I'll go ahead and keep the polling question up for a few more seconds, and then we'll take a quick look and see where we're at, and we'll add a little color commentary, and hopefully as a result of the webinar will inspire you to look at investing in technology that gives you that visibility that can really help impact working capital optimization. So let me go ahead, close that. So let's take a quick look. So we have 23% limited, very limited, 36%. So what we see here is we have 7% who have 20/20 vision and timely information. So I think given the cost effectiveness of technology that we have now, that we should aspire to that 20/20 vision. And then of course, we start to look where we're at, where we need to be. So in some cases, if you're good across the board but not optimal, you have blind spots. That can be a function of things that don't require an investment in technology. So you want to look at that. But I'm heartened to see that we've got over 40% good across the board in 2020 vision. But of course, as I well know, I'm still really plugged in as a Treasury thought leader that we have some work to do. And again, the good news is this technology is game changing to me, and I wish I would have had access to that. And again, this visibility is really what's going to drive the effectiveness of your cash forecasting. The more that you can see, you start to understand who's moving it, why it's moving, why it's movement, the trends. Then you'll be able to really do better at understanding your drivers and how to model, and then you'll start to see more value in your efforts to your cash forecasting. So thank you very much, everyone. So just in terms of forecasting accuracy, really quick, I'm happy to send everyone a copy of the slides. If you send me an email, I'm happy to do that for you. So just real quick, just a couple ways. The absolute deviation is a measure of the absolute error, so your actuals versus your forecast, number of periods, and you can take that into percentage terms. And then you can have your cumulative forecast error, actuals versus forecasted values, and then your average forecast error depending on your number of periods. The important point here is to have that measure of your accuracy, and then really to understand that variance between your actuals and your forecasted values. And you want to pay attention to the positive variances as well as the negative variances. So that's very important. So let's go ahead and ask our next polling question, which also is a pillar of cash forecasting success, asking you to share with me how you would characterize your company's understanding of the key drivers of your cash forecasting accuracy. Obviously, it's going to be related to the visibility that you have. So a lot of different choices. Limited might be adequate, but you need to get better. It's good. It's becoming a key company focus. Or D, it's ideal, which I'm hoping a lot of you are there or get there. And then E, it just may be you don't know at this time. So I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering our polling question here today. I want to remind you that we can take your questions at any time in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. Let's go ahead and close the polling question, take a quick peek. And it's kind of what I expected given the results of the last polling question. So, so we have up on the upper end, we have 11% ideal. So we saw that we were in that range for the other parts, but good, right? That means you probably still have some blind spots and you need work on that, on those drivers. And what we really need to be able to do is we need to be able to identify what those drivers are. You need to monitor those, understand the relationships between the drivers, leading indicators of those drivers. So what is it that impacts positive, negative variance? How do we control and mitigate that variance? And then we need to be able to test, right? Or do we need to validate those drivers as well of our forecasting accuracy? So thank you very much, everyone, for your consideration. So some inherent barriers. So my process, as those of you who are on webinars that I speak on know very well, I like to say, where are you at? Where are you going to be? And then what's it going to take to get there? And then when you do this without looking at your inherent barriers, it can look like you need to climb Mount Everest, right? But what happens if you start to look at, okay, these are the inherent barriers that I have: people, process, and technology. Which of these barriers can I mitigate or remove so I can jump over them without much investment? And then you start to see, it's not such a big climb after all. And so it really shows you that what it's really going to take for you to get there is not overwhelming. So you can really get a handle on that and get people on board and make it happen where you have the cash forecasting success that you deserve at your company. So just some inherent barriers. I've experienced these personally. People who affect the forecasting accuracy, maybe they're giving us information, maybe we need data for them, they don't understand or they don't care. Maybe it's a business leader. You don't have that internal support from executives as to the importance of cash forecasting. And then we have my favorite: people involved do not play nicely with each other. So if you have some consolidation, that can be within departments or across departments. So we need to make sure that our people, we have a consistent process. The people that are involved in it, accuracy, understand it. They understand why. If they need an incentive to do so, well, let's put some sort of financial incentive on there. Most of the time, when you explain to people the value of what they're doing, and then of course you ask them, do you have the tools that you need, right? You want to have that consistent tool, right, that you're using. Do you have the tools you need? You have the support you need? And then they get on board. If you don't ask them, right, then they're going to have some sort of, I'm not going to do this. I don't really have time for this. I don't have support. So let's pay attention to those people. The process, right? We want that to be consistent. We don't want processes that compete against each other. And again, my process, it goes with the process. We want those people who affect forecasting accuracy, don't understand or don't care. They own a process and they're very protective of it. Well, let's incent them to change that policy, that process, so that we can make these cash forecasting valuable. So let's go ahead and ask our next polling question. And these will come less frequently. Don't be afraid of the polling questions here coming rapidly. Just asking you to share with us the primary technology your company uses for cash forecasting. We have Excel, TMS, Treasury Workstation, ERP, or if you use an ERP module, maybe use an FP&A, CRM, BI solution, or other. So I appreciate everyone's consideration in answering our questions. My folks out there interested in CTP credit, you are going to need to answer all my polling questions and stay on for the remainder of the webinar. And finally, we can take your questions in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. So let's go ahead and close that polling question, and let's go ahead and see what we have here. So we have the overwhelming majority in Excel, 73%. I'm not necessarily surprised by that number. The good news is, hopefully after this webinar, you will be inspired to see what's out there and look outside of Excel. I don't think I need to go through some of the challenges that you have with Excel. And just real quick on one of the big ones is just getting that information, right? That data, that integrability among systems, that data in and out, and owning that model, lack of scenario analysis. So our other speakers will definitely touch on these challenges. So here's our technology inherent barriers. A lot of these are a consequence of Excel. Systems don't communicate with each other. We have more than one version of the truth. Doesn't allow collaboration between parties or version control, and it doesn't meet data needs in timeliness and accuracy. So what I like to do is do a gap analysis. So you look, where are you at? Where do you need to be in terms of people, process, and technology? People, who do you need to get on board? Process, what procedures do you need to, processes do you need to change? Technology, how do you need to communicate better? Do you need an upgrade, or do you need a new software? And then just the right method and workflow. You need to understand the purposes of your forecast, your data, the sources, the accuracy of where it's coming from, understand the sources of the variance, and focus on the sources you can control. So there may be some endogenous factors that you can't control. In selecting a forecasting method, don't try and fit a method or procedure to your data. Let the objectives and data drive your process, not the technology. And it's important to identify colleagues who face your same challenges and engage them to identify best practices for your company. Go to AFP conferences, TMA conferences, go to the AFP annual conferences, meet people face-to-face, go on LinkedIn, get in those groups, ask questions. Invaluable to talk to someone who is in your industry or faces the same receipts and disbursements flows that you do as well. So now we're going to go from theory to practice. It's now my pleasure to welcome Jared Allen to the webinar. He's a senior treasury manager at the Triumph Group, where he is responsible for treasury operations and cash management. He's worked in a treasury capacity for publicly traded companies in the manufacturing and pharmaceutical spaces. During his career, he's been an advocate for change and innovation with Treasury. His background extends outside of Treasury into FP&A and business development. Jared has a BS in finance from Temple University. Jared, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Thank you, Ernie, and hello to everybody out there. So I'm here today to talk about some of the challenges that we face on the cash forecasting side of things. So Ernie, if you don't mind clicking to the next slide for me here. So I think really your treasury forecast, your cash, your sources and use cash forecast all kind of starts with the data that you have available, right? So the first thing we really need to do is go through and identify all those sources of data. So you should have access to a lot of different data. There should be budgets or AOPs, annual operating plans. There's going to be FP&A forecasts. There's going to be AR, AP agings, depending on your corporate structure, whether or not you're working in a centralized or decentralized environment. There may be inputs from subsidiaries that you want to take into consideration. For those who have debt, there's going to be your third-party interest schedules that you're going to want to take into play, payroll schedule. I mean, the breadth of information that's out there is going to be wide-ranging, right? And really, all of that information set aside, we also have access to all of our historical bank account information. So all of that information is going to be warehoused within your bank platform, or if people download their BAIs on a daily basis, they may have it stored somewhere else. But your historical bank information is really going to be a great starting point because you have easy access to it. You know it's accurate, and it really provides a narrative, or there's really a story when you go back and you analyze it and you start to trend it out. Sometimes it can be challenging to identify what information is actually out there and to actually get this information. So, I think that's one of the major hurdles that we face on the cash management side. And it's maybe it's not so much access to the information, but understanding what information suits you best and your forecasting methodology best. So to Ernie's earlier point, I think it's important to have a goal, to know specifically what you want to accomplish out of it. Because depending on what you want to accomplish out of your cash forecast, or what you want to gain, what value you want to get out of your cash forecast, it's really going to determine the level of detail that you forecast at. So for some, maybe it's just a matter of forecasting total debits and total credits. Or other people who want to get more into the weeds of things, maybe they want to look at and forecast cash on more of a BAI level, or some kind of categorization level. Some folks may want to forecast at a daily basis, on a weekly basis, or maybe just even on a monthly basis. So I think it really all depends on what the goal is. But being able to answer that question of what you want to get out of it is really going to help you identify what information is right for you. But to Ernie's earlier point, sometimes the data that you have access to is really going to determine that for you. So depending on the level of detail you're able to extract, that may kind of determine to you what your best path forward is. Some other challenges, like I mentioned earlier, if you're working in a very decentralized environment, that can be difficult sometimes to get the visibility and to get access to all of the information that you need. If you're working in companies that have distinct ERPs or varying ERPs, that can also be very difficult. So I know from experience in the past, I've worked for companies that have been on 5, 6, 7 ERPs. That can be challenging sometimes to go in and get access to some of the data that you want. It can be burdensome as well. But really what it comes down to is really just knowing the business and knowing the right people. If you know who you need to reach out to in order to get the information, again, I'm going to go back to Ernie's earlier point. If you know who's actually pushing the button that controls that cash inflow or cash outflow, they're going to be the person that's going to be able to best direct you to where you can get that information, and then start to also develop a repeatable process for getting that information to you. Some of the other things or other challenges is really choosing which source of data or which methodology you would like to use. So there's going to be information that's reported to you from the FP&A group, and there's also going to be your actual cash history. So your historical bank account information. Like I said earlier, I think the historical bank account information provides a great baseline for you. So that's going to give you a good understanding of kind of how the business has historically performed, and will give you a good sense of what seems realistic going forward. However, it's not going to really give you that visibility into any changes in the business that are coming up. So you really need to make sure that you work with the FP&A team, who's going to be on the more of the reported side, and really go through it and look and try to call out changes in the business. And you really want to go through and evaluate the likelihood for these changes, try to quantify what it is, or possibly discount it depending on the level of likelihood that you've evaluated, and also time it out. So from an FP&A perspective or from a reporting perspective, sometimes they may say, well, we should see a working capital benefit in August. But does that always translate to additional cash coming in the door in August, or is that cash going to come in 30, 60 days later? So you have to start to think of that as well. And for certain categories of cash, I think really different methodologies are going to end up being the most effective. So it's not going to be a one shoe fits all. So for your payroll, for your taxes, for your benefits, these categories, a lot of this can be driven off of actuals and can just be some kind of historical trend that you put in place. But for other items like your AR or your AP, that's where you might want to explore different options. So you might want to take a look at the AR, the AP agings. You might want to take a look at your sales forecast, and you may even want to run multiple models that essentially tries to give you a better sense of which forecasting methodology you should look at going forward for those specific line items. Switching over to the next slide. So the analysis piece. So your source of forecast information is most likely going to be raw. So whether or not this information is going to come out of the ERP, whether or not it's going to be a report from the FP&A group, or whether it's going to be just a dump of your BAI files, the information is probably going to need to be massaged one way or another. So really what it comes, and my preference is, especially as I noted earlier, your starting point should always kind of come on the actual side first. So looking at your BAI files, because your BAI files are going to hold a lot of information. And if you're working in a very decentralized organization, sometimes your bank information that you have is the only kind of consolidated information that you have access to, because it's not going to range across ERPs. I mean, all of that information is going to be held within your bank, especially if you have one cash management relationship. But really the question is, well, what do you do with that information? Or how do you take your BAI file? How do you interpret it? Or more importantly, how do you build a forecast off of it? Because if you just look at a BAI file, it doesn't look like a lot, but there is a lot of good information that's hidden within there that we can use to sort of enrich the data. And that kind of takes me to my next point, is how do you enrich the data? How do you take just a raw BAI file and start to get something out of it, right? And that really comes with a lot of customization and a lot of manual work, right? So really, in order to do that, you need to be very familiar with the transactions that are coming through the bank on a daily basis, and you need to be able to really interpret the information that you're seeing. It's not always easy to do, and depending on the quantity of transactions that you have on a daily basis, it can be extremely burdensome. So finding ways to automate that level of tagging or that level of categorization will save you a lot of time in the long run, but it will really provide you a lot of good insights into how the business is operating, and it will show you a lot of the sources of inflows and outflows and the timing around those sources, inflows and outflows. So again, there's a lot of really good information that's in there. And it's also, when you have your forecast built out and your forecast model is mature, looking at your BAIs and categorizing your transactions and calling out transactions on a daily basis will also help you move items within your forecast as well. So if you were anticipating a $15 million receipt at the end of the month and it ended up coming in on the 15th of the month, being able to call that out immediately and remove that and move that forward, that way you avoid the opportunity to possibly double count it, or if it went the other way, avoid the opportunity to miss it altogether. Going down to the next point, forecasting modeling has to reflect reality. So the problem with just looking at things through a 3-month rolling average or a trend analysis is you don't always pick up those changes or swings in the business. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. So, if you have a seasonal business where you know that your sales are going to spike in your summer, your 3-month rolling average that you get, that you work out in the month of May and June, isn't going to be reflective of what actually is going to happen, right? So you need a tool or a methodology that's dynamic enough to identify this and to adapt, right? And really a good way to do this outside of an automation point is really just to look internally, right? And to benchmark against other forecasts that are out there. So whether you use the AOP, whether you use an FP&A cash flow forecast, but just using something to kind of get a sense of the reasonableness of your forecast will kind of help you sort through maybe some of those seasonal or some of those fluctuation points that you may see in cash throughout the year. So again, this is really going to help you get a good sense of how reasonable your forecast is. And then also, kind of taking out the seasonality of things, but just to be able to identify potential new product launches, be able to identify divestitures, and not only quantifying the proceeds and the timing of that divestiture, but also understanding how your cash forecast could potentially look with the elimination of that business is also something that you're going to want to be able to identify proactively, so you can make the necessary changes ahead of time. And then there's also the need to identify patterns. So through actualizing and the analysis of this historical data really gives you the opportunity to just start to identify what these known trends are, right? And known trends being, when people pay you, for example. So, maybe you notice that every Monday and Tuesday are your highest lockbox or receipts days, and maybe you notice that on Thursday and Fridays, are your highest disbursement days. Maybe you start to see that, during the fourth week of every month, people start holding AP, and you notice that AP is much lower on the last work week of the month. And maybe at month end or quarter end, you notice that people shut off AP, for the last 2 weeks of the quarter. You start to be able to call these things out, and it really provides you a lot of insights into just how the company operates overall. So not only is it going to help benefit you from a cash forecasting perspective, but it's also going to shine a lot of light as to how, from a treasury or from a cash perspective, the business is operating. And it's really going to allow you to kind of go back and look at things and make some suggestions that could also help the predictability of cash forecasts going forward. So, maybe you can start to go back and say, okay, I know Monday and Tuesdays are high receipts, and I know right now we're doing all our payment runs later in the week. Well, maybe we want to consider moving our payment runs up earlier in the week to align with those days of highest receipts and potentially eliminate some unnecessary borrowings. Stepping down a notch, we look at the forecast automation piece. So if you think about just everything that Ernie has talked about today and everything that we've covered so far here, there's a lot of information, right? And there's a lot that needs to be done with this information in order to get it into a form or format that is valuable to you. This is very hard, as I'm sure I saw the poll earlier. I see many of us are doing our forecasts in Excel. When you really want to get into the detail, and you really want to start looking at things on more of a granular level, it's very hard to do that with Excel, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of manual work, and it really leaves you open to mistakes, quite frankly. So you really need to create an accurate, repeatable process and put that process in place. And then hopefully once you've proven out that the process is accurate and it is repeatable, that's when you can start to look to automate these things. And once you're able to automate it, you can spend more time making those recommendations to the business on maybe best practices from an operational perspective, or spending more of your time looking at variance analysis and trying to take some of those learnings, apply it to your cash forecast to improve predictability going forward. Because let's face it, forecasting in multiple spreadsheets is not the most adequate way to go about doing things. You flip next slide, Ernie, please. So let's talk about some of the challenges, right? So I think you could probably make a whole presentation with challenges that you face on the forecasting side, but we'll just kind of pick out a few of them here, a few of the high level ones that I think will resonate with most of the people on the call. Not everyone thinks and speaks cash. I mean, let's face it, Treasury sometimes doesn't always get a seat at the table, so to speak. So sometimes you're not always the first to know about things, and actually you could be on the later side of knowing things. You may not actually know things until it starts to actualize. So how do you kind of go about making sure that you have that seat in the table, that you're involved in those discussions? And when people start to hear something that is going to impact cash, they think about you. They keep you in mind and say, okay, we need to get this information over to Treasury so they can incorporate it as part of their forecast. Because let's face it, if there's a planned reduction in inventory that somebody's projecting, one of the things they're probably not thinking about is, well, how is this going to impact Treasury sources and use forecast over the next 3 months? but you need to start to train the business to think that way, because if there is going to be something materially changing within the organization, you need to be made aware of it so you can incorporate that into your forecast going forward. So another example, let's just say real estate's working on a sale of one of the buildings that you may have, and they're projecting proceeds of 5 million. You want them to communicate that information to you as soon as they start working on that, as soon as they realize it's within the realm of possibility. You want them to think, okay, Treasury, we need to make Treasury aware that this is potentially coming down the pipe, so they can be proactive in adding this into their forecast. So really, it just comes down to having lots of conversations with people, kind of putting yourself out there and really working to integrate yourself into the business and kind of keeping yourself in the know. Not always an easy task, but it's definitely one that's essential to getting all the information that you need. So kind of tying it back to what Ernie said earlier, it's that resource gap, right? It's kind of taking the onus to try to narrow that gap on your own. Secondarily, it's just knowing the business in general. So understanding the tendencies of the business. Do invoices get entered into the system and paid the same day? So, if you go out to your AP agings and you look at it, you may not see a whole lot out there, but what you might not realize is that, somebody's entering an invoice into the system. They're not waiting till, for the 30, 45-day terms to pay. They're just paying it right away. If that's the case, you're not going to have a whole lot of visibility into what's going out the door 7, 14, 21 days from now. So just getting an understanding of how the business operates and what their tendencies are can also help you in making decisions from a forecasting perspective. But I think not only helping on that would not only help on the forecast side, but it also allows you to make recommendations to the business on how to maybe do things differently. So this is what I was mentioning earlier about best practices, right? So you can start to reach out to the different organizations or whoever those people are who are controlling those inflows and outflows, and you can say, hey, let's move our payment days to 1 day a week. So let's not do payments every day. Let's just do payments on Thursdays. And by moving the payments to Thursdays, you'll have better visibility, or it'll make it much easier to forecast what your outflows are. Or you can say, you know what, we have way too many check payments. I see the check payments coming in my BAI files every day. I never know when these things are going to clear. Some of these checks are huge and have material impacts on where we stand from an end of day position. So let's move these check payments over to ACH to help get us that better predictability. So there's certain changes that you can make on the operational side of things that will lead to better visibility and to better predictability. But again, that's going to come with knowing the business, right? So that takes us down to the age-old question in Treasury. What's better, the FP&A forecast, your top-down approach, or your bottoms-up approach? And the thing that I've always come across throughout my years in Treasury is, well, why don't they match, or why don't they tie out, right? Because in the perfect world, the FP&A approach is going to come up with one number, you're going to come up with one number, and they would align perfectly with one another. But in reality, that just doesn't happen. And there's a lot of reasons why that doesn't happen, right? I mean, the FP&A team or whoever's doing your top-down forecast is going to be considering certain non-cash adjustments that are never going to come in to your sources and use because they are just that, non-cash adjustments. But essentially how I look at it is, between the two forecasts, you should come up with this sort of bumper car theory where you should be able to say, okay, if you want to guide on free cash flow, or you want to guide on, or you want an understanding of what your total debt is going to be at the end of a certain period of time, these two forecasts should provide two numbers, and you should fall with somewhere within those two numbers, and you should have a lot of confidence that is going to be the case. Because essentially, you're both driving at the same thing. You're just taking two separate methodologies to arrive at that point. So really, the question comes down to, well, again, what is better? I don't think there's one that's materially better than the other. I just think it's two different ways of looking at things. I think both ways are correct. However, again, we are going to see some differences because of some of the noise that goes in there. But essentially, the only thing that you're really going to miss from a cash history perspective, and we talked about this quite a bit already, is you're looking in the rear view mirror, and you're kind of taking what you've seen happen historically and saying, this is what's going to happen in the future. And you just have to be careful about that, because sometimes you can get bit because you're missing something by just looking at stale historical data, right? With that said, it's important to be able to track and compare the two. And we've talked about it. Measuring the two is going to be difficult because it is not an apples to apples comparison between the two, because there is that sort of distortion of the non-cash piece that you see on the FP&A side or on the reporting side. But the sources and use model is a really nice thing, because many sources and use models are built at more of a transactional level. So that should help call out variances quicker. And it's really going to help you get to variances on a more of a transactional level. So, when you see discrepancies, you can say, okay, well, receipts came in higher because we had a customer that paid us a one-time payment of $15 million as a catch-up at the beginning of the month. Having that type of detail and that level of insight is something that the FP&A team is most likely not going to have. So it's going to go a long way into providing credibility for your forecast. And it's also good, like I mentioned earlier, it's going to go a long way in pulling out those variance items and being able to quickly identify what the differences are, and maybe what some of the misses are as well. So from a lessons learned perspective, I think we've talked a lot about certain lessons that we've learned or that we've seen, right? But ultimately what it comes down to is, you have good data in your BAI files. It's just a matter of how do you get value out of that data, right? And then when you use that file to kind of create your baseline sources and use treasury model, what other pieces do you really need to add to that in order to adapt, like as your business is adapting as well? So it's really kind of, starting with that raw information and really building out that process and which is ultimately going to lead you to that end goal, right? So Ernie, I kind of send it back your way.
All right. Thank you very much for your insights, and very much appreciated. So now I am going to welcome Alf Newland to the webinar, and his colleague and himself, Nathan Barnett, are going to let us take a look at the new frontier, cash forecasting, and how to manage those forecasts visually. Alf, the floor is yours. Okay, Alf, you may be on mute.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Ernie. So a little bit about financial sciences and Atom. Atom is a visually oriented treasury management solution. And one of our main technology principles is, whenever possible, to represent financial information visually. And we think that's extremely productive, particularly for complicated information or where there's lots of data. Next slide, Ernie. So to reset the discussion a little bit, we're going to show you two examples. One general example about representing forecasts visually, and then one specific having to do with a challenging area regarding modeling. And as Ernie and Jared said, you start from the left. One of the challenges from forecasting is just managing data sources. And this shows you a traditional forecast with a lot of automation. So you're already bringing in forecast information in automated fashion from various different sources. But nonetheless, this is a very traditional view of looking at a forecast, in this case, a monthly forecast. Next slide, Ernie. Again, another very common exercise is doing the benchmarking that Jared talked about. And here's also a traditional view of looking with one type of cash flow category to do benchmarking, comparing actual forecasts. But again, very traditional, still using a spreadsheet paradigm. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Nate.
Okay, so as Alf showed in the previous slide, a traditional forecast has numbers, and of course you can put them in Excel and put some graphs together, but it doesn't really give you an automated solution that updates throughout the day as new information is pulled in. So this is an example to basically of taking that forward and using a visual approach. This is the same type of forecast where we're looking at a monthly forecast, actual plan and forecast. We have a budget produced at the beginning of the year. The forecasts are produced every month. So every month we get a rolling 12 months forecast. And what we highlight here is that when you look at this visually, you can get a lot more out of it and a lot faster. So if we focus in on May, we can see, for instance, that the plan posted at the beginning of the year was much different than the actual, but the forecast and the actual were in sync. So that's kind of curious to see how could our plan be so far off, but our forecast is actually in sync with the actual. So if we go to the next slide, the Treasury system will allow you to track forecast iterations and instances as they change over time. So looking at the May forecast, we reforecasted May in January, February, March, April, and again in the beginning of May for how we'd end up. So this is an example of how having this information visually available will help you see things very quickly, and then having the technology to drill down into them and look at them in detail will make it so you can solve problems a lot faster and adjust as necessary. Next slide, Ernie.
So now we're going to go to a harder problem, which we think that the automation and visual aspects really help. And that's circling back to something Jared talked about, is forecast modeling. So everybody knows cash history is a great source of information to create forecasts. You have to have good cash history as well as a forecast model in order to do that. Certainly, our customers want to benchmark any model output to other sources of forecast. Again, circling back to Jared's example with FP&A. And it certainly creates specific challenges which are addressed by automation and visualization. So here's what we see from our customers, what a modeling lifecycle looks like. First, you have to get all the cash data. You can't just create a model, you have to look for patterns, and you have to inspect the data. Once you see patterns, you can then create a model. And of course, you have to constantly improve that model. You use the model to generate forecasts, and then you start to test your model via benchmarking and other methods. And of course, you tweak as you go on. And then you start the whole process over again. It's very cyclic. It's evolutionary. It's a constant process. Next slide. So a little bit here's, starting with the source data. It's lots of data. This data has already been enriched, so it's not just raw data, but it's been categorized and inspected for day of week and things like that. But nonetheless, it is raw. It is a lot of data detail, and it's really hard to see patterns from this data. Next slide. So there's different ways you can visualize data, and one very straightforward way is to look at data in a calendar view, because after all, a lot of forecast information is seasonal. And this approach takes that data for a particular type of cash flow category, and it applies a heat map technology, so you can actually see lesser and greater amounts. So the lower amounts are in pale green, and the higher amounts are in dark green. Next slide. So instantly you can see the pattern. This happens to be an end of month situation where you have a lot of activity at the end of the month. Next slide. And in fact, you can then go and say, let's see if that's actually true, and go back to the last few quarters. And you can see that the pattern persists. So this is one way of taking potentially a lot of data and looking at things visually, and instantly a pattern pops out. Next slide.
Okay, so seeing the data on calendars can be very powerful and can make things very obvious, which is helpful. But of course, you're going to want some analytics around the history, and that's what this slide is showing. So you of course are going to need the analytics, the data behind it, before you can start visually. So if you look at this little box, we have certain date characteristics, like what week of the month does this activity happen, particularly in the first, second, third, fourth week of the month? What days of the week does it typically happen on? And then you can see the probabilities. So for instance, looking at row 2 in our small matrix, the week of the month, so for this type of activity, vendor payments, typically the activity happens in the second week of the month, 50% of the time. And then 79% of the time it happens in either the second or the third week. So the same thing for day of week. Monday is a 68% chance. Tuesday is an 87% chance. So looking at that big green spot you can see for this category of payments, it typically happens on the third week of the month, sorry, the second week of the month in that big blue on the top chart on Mondays. And this makes it so it just becomes much more obvious than combing through lots of statistics and data. You can just see it visually, and then you can take this back and improve your model, as we'll talk about more. Next slide.
So to actually create a model, of course, model characteristics and parameters are involve details. There's no way around that if you're especially dealing with all the types of activity that treasuries have to handle. You do have to do model parameters. You certainly do have to then generate forecasts and review those forecasts. You have to go through that step. Next slide. The traditional approach of looking at forecast benchmarking, again, looks like a spreadsheet. So the question is, how can you do that even more visually? Next slide.
And here we do that. So going back to some of the key statistics Ernie was talking about, our mean absolute deviation, average forecast error, etc. We can easily still have those, even though we're not using an Excel type solution. But you can see visually in purple our actuals. In blue, you can see our Treasury forecast, and in yellow you can see, I'm sorry, in yellow you can see the FP&A forecast. So basically, we're graphing the differences in a stacked bar below, so that you can easily see month to month which forecast is more accurate, and how different is it based on the statistics, and then taking that forward into your cash forecast, you can depending on what you want to do, use one or the other, or a blended solution, or for certain periods you can use one versus the other. So again, having it visual makes the decisions a lot easier. Next slide, Ernie.
I'm sorry, one comment, Ernie. Notice that the Treasury forecasting is much better than FP&A. I just wanted to note that.
Great. Yes, hopefully that's the case. So thank you very much, Alf and Nathan, for your visual representation and showing folks that visual approach. And of course, we would be happy to give you a more in-depth presentation on the module itself. So our last polling question will allow you the opportunity to ask to get more information and maybe have more time with Alf and Nathan with a customized demonstration. So just some closing thoughts, and as far as the Q&A, I will reach out to everyone to get your thoughts on the Q&A. It was important that we give Jared the opportunity to really share his insights. So being a practitioner myself at heart, I found that extremely powerful. So just some closing thoughts. Cash forecasting success. You got to define the goals of your forecast, understand your data, engage your professional colleagues who face similar cash forecasting challenges. As Jared mentioned so eloquently, you have to engage your people across the enterprise. You want to align with your FP&A colleagues, and how about this? How about those forecasts actually match? Wouldn't that be great? You need to assess your current goal resources. You want to get those barriers that you have, perform that gap analysis, and then you really want to start to build the business case for forecasting accuracy, and also the ability to sell that business case. So for those of us who are in Excel, which is the vast majority, and even if you're in a TMS or workstation, I think you can see the value of what we're getting here, and that visual approach. And to me, that's just almost mind-boggling that I can see that, because it all makes sense. And that's an easy way to explain to others who might not be in Treasury and Finance. Your CFO wants a dashboard, wants to see what's going on. You can say, okay, here's what's going on. And then it obviously just shows you immediately, right, where are you off on your drivers? Where do you need to validate? So it helps you tremendously in the validation of your forecast and getting the value from your forecast as well. So as I make my closing comments, I'm going to go ahead and launch our polling question. Final polling question. I would like to once again thank our webinar speakers, Jared, Nathan, and Alf, for their tremendous insights. Thank you very much. I'd also like to once again thank our webinar partner, Financial Sciences. We certainly appreciate and share their commitment to thought leadership. I encourage you to visit the Financial Sciences website. Also encourage you to answer that final polling question and learn more about the cutting edge technology that they are offering to improve the value of cash forecasting. And I'm going to go ahead and leave my polling question up for a few more seconds here. Everyone go ahead and please answer that. We appreciate everyone's consideration in answering the polling question. Okay, thank you very much. And finally, I would like to thank the audience so much for your valuable time. Please let us know what we can do better and make the rest of your day great, everyone.